Oh, boy.
Hebrew school.
Oh,
Camp.
Hebrew
Do
school.
camp.
Hebrew school. My brother and I barely have, I have one brother, and he's younger than I am. And my husband is always amazed at how we don't have the same memories. Because I went to Hebrew school on like Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday at 9 o'clock, for example. And he went to Hebrew school on Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday at 11 o'clock. So we were almost never together. We were always in Hebrew school.
2 ships in the night.
2 ships in the night. That was exactly how it was. My brother will have memories of doing something with my father, and I'll say, I didn't know you did that. Well, I was in Hebrew school when he did it. So he built an entire go-kart, with my father.
Plus, you were girl,
right.
girl, not work girl, and he's a guy.
Right.
So there's a different dynamic there,
Yeah,
too.
that's true. But Hebrew school was a big part of everything.
My very first day, I was 5 years old, going to Sunday school.
Yes.
So Hebrew school started a little later. I'm in Sunday school, and I have my older sister and it's Sunday school, right? Christians get all bent out of shape. We have too many meetings. I had synagogue to go to on Shabbat, Friday night and Saturday. You went to synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that. Then you had Hebrew school. You went 3 days a week.
Yes.
And then you had Sunday school. And so if a Christian says, man, Wednesday and Sunday are killing me, I say, I have no sympathy at all for you. Every day of the week we got to go. So don't complain. But for me, my first meeting was, I was 5 years old. My father had my sister, who has already been going to Sunday school because she was older than me. But now it's my first day. And I am telling you, I was crying, please don't make me go. I don't want to go. What are they going to do? And I had no interest at all. My second story was camp. Jewish people don't like camp. I don't want camp. I'm not interested in camp. But I went to camp because my mother told me. And I went to Orthodox camp. So that meant that the first 4 hours of Orthodox camp was going in the Chumash, in the reading and translating. In the summer. This is the summer. And so I went 3 straight days. The 4th day, I know this is on tape. We're recorded. My mother saying, the bus is here. It's time to go. I said, I'm constipated. I'm not going. I can't. I'm sick. I'm in the bathroom. My mother said, you're going. I said, you can't make me go. I'm constipated. And that every morning it would be the same thing because I hated the morning part that's camp. So what are you going to do?
One of the things that I really loved, and your story reminded me of it a little bit, Steve, I loved when we did the Birkat Hamazon. As Christians, we pray before we eat. And in Judaism, you'll say a blessing for the bread, very brief, and a blessing over the cup, the wine, very brief. But the real thing that you do to thank God is done after the meal, and it's very long. And it's...
Boy, is it long.
It's long, and it has like different parts. So you can divide it up among different people. And they taught us how to do the Birkat in Hebrew school. Well, on Sunday morning, the men's club met for breakfast, and they had lox and bagels. And they didn't do the Birkat. So they would get kids from the Hebrew school who knew how to do it. So I always volunteered. And I knew all the parts, and you got lox and bagels. So that was great. So,
it's a great deal.
So when I got picked to do it, we would go into the fellowship hall, and we call it the auditorium, and they'd have all these long tables set up, and they had lox and bagels. And, we didn't ever toast the bagels. It was just bagels. And they were all tables and cream cheese and everything. And then when the Birkat would come, I knew the part I was supposed to sing, and I did it. And that was great. I love that. And I still like that tradition. I don't know if I can remember all the parts. I remember the beginning goes a little bit like Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam chazan haolam kulo b'tuvo b'chein b'chesed u'vrachamim hu natan lechem l'chol basar ki le'olam chasdo, and that's all I can remember.
Which is more than I can remember. I think Shabbat is while you're doing it, you might not like it. There were times I didn't like it because you couldn't do stuff on Saturday. But the tradition, especially Friday night, my dad and I going to synagogue.
Did you walk?
Actually, there was at one part of where we were living, it was too far, so we drove stealthily. But then we moved and we were closer, and I walked. Yeah. So again, you get two Jewish people together, you get three opinions, and the Jewish people, I'm sure you heard it in Hebrew school. They said, well, yes, you're supposed to do it, but we do it this way. It's okay. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We lived too far to walk, but I always thought it was nice to see the fathers and the sons walking to shul together.
It is. It's a wonderful. It's one of those moments that if you hear, there are some journalists and radio hosts on conservative stations or TVs who will they're Jewish, and they will tell you one of the best things about being Orthodox is turning off their phones on Friday afternoon, knowing that they're not going to turn it on until Saturday night. It's a detox moment. They use a lot of modern psychology to really to say, hey, it's better for you, it's healthy for you to do that. Well, that's true, but God instituted that. He knew all about that ahead of time.
Yes, he did.
Because even though the Bible talks about eternal life in the Older Testament, Jewish scriptures, there are Jewish people, especially because of the Holocaust, that if there was a God, if there was a Messiah would come now. If there was a God, he wouldn't allow the Holocaust to take place. No, I know what tradition is, I know what they're saying, but listen, when you're dead, you're dead, it's over.
My mother used to say that all the time. When you're dead, you're dead. And I was taught that Judaism is a religion for the living. A rabbi once told me that Christians, they're always worried about the afterlife and what happens after you die. And Judaism's not like that. We don't think about what happens after we die. We think about today, the here and now. And when you're dead, you're dead. Well, my parents were both dead when I came to know the Lord. So I didn't really have the struggle that a lot of Jewish people have, trying to convince my parents. And it turns out that I only had one brother, and I was afraid to tell him that I had gotten saved. So I waited a couple years to tell him, and it turns out he'd gotten saved 3 years before me. He was afraid to tell me. So the Lord really was so good to me because I didn't have a separation from my only family, really, my brother. We were very close, and we still are. His wife was a believer. She got saved through Campus Crusade for Christ. And then when they were in college, I remember him telling me, he started dating her when she was a freshman and he was a sophomore. And I remember they broke up. And I said, well, why'd you break up? And he said, she became a Jesus freak. And it turned out she had gotten saved through Campus Crusade. And then a little while later, they were together again. And I said, I thought you said she was a Jesus freak. And all he would say was, well, it's okay, because he had gotten saved.
He was a Jesus freak,
and
too.
He didn't want to tell me. He was afraid to tell me.
Lorna is right. Judaism, I think Judaism, l'chaim, is a very important expression in Judaism. It means to life. And so living is very important. And there are people who believe when you're dead, you're dead. But this idea of Christianity is a shame to the family. You're a meshumad. And so they're not worried about afterlife. They could care less about that. It's what's my best friend, my mahjong partner, the guy that I go out to breakfast. What do I do What do I do then? I left for California on my own because I knew I was a shame to them. They didn't want me. They didn't want anybody to know. And my being in and around them made it a higher probability that they would know. So I moved away. Well, what I didn't know is that about 8 years after I became a believer, my mother shared this story with me. And she said, I'm with my best friend. They were 50 years friends. I'm with my best friend, and we're eating, as we customarily did. And this friend says, Blanche, I got to tell you something. And it's not easy. I've been carrying this burden for years already. You're my friend. I have to tell you this story. And my mother said, sure, no problem. It's important to you. I won't tell anybody. Please, I want you to unload whatever burden you have. And so the woman, her name was Gertie, of course, and Gertie is looking at Blanche, and she says, my son became a believer in Jesus. And so my mother starts to laugh. I mean, laughing as loud. And her best friend saying, Blanche, I knew I shouldn't tell you. You're laughing at me. I'm so embarrassed. I unburdened myself. This has been for years, and you're laughing. My mother said to me, my shoulders were going up and down. And she said, no, I'm not laughing at you. I'm honest. And the woman is getting angrier and angrier. My mother, finally she comes down. She said, honestly, I'm not laughing at you. You have no idea how thankful I am that you just shared that. I got something worse to tell you. I have 2 who got saved. She one-upped her. My mother told me that story, and it is an amazing story. They both, best friends, didn't know, heavy burden, and laughter is medicine. So it was good for them because they were able to unload to each other.
I think the hardest part is to believe that a man could be God. The deity of Christ, in my opinion, is the number one difficult thing to believe, because so much of Judaism revolves around the fact that God doesn't want human sacrifice. And if you know the Old Testament, God got very angry at the Israelites because they were sacrificing their children to Molech and everything else, which he said, I didn't command you to do. And to think that that Jesus could be God, that to me, that is a very, very difficult thing. And then why would God want a human sacrifice? I grew up in a very Catholic area where I kept hearing, Jesus died for the sins of the world, Jesus died for the sins of the world. Why would God, who hates human sacrifice, want a man to die for the sins of the world? That is how my thought process was.
No, I agree with Laura. I agree with you 100% that that's the number one issue. I think another issue that is really important is most Jewish people don't believe in a Messiah. Of course, they don't believe in a God-man, and I agree again that that's a number one. But number two is the shanda, a Yiddish word. Lorna, you know what that means. It's a shame that a tradition in Judaism, which is a biblical truth, is rejected by the overwhelming majority of Jewish people. It is a shanda.
One of the things in Christianity that it's I don't know if you could call it a tradition, but this is something that is very, very dear to me that I didn't do when I was Jewish, is a daily quiet time. This is really important to me, to just get my Bible every day, read my Bible, and pray. This was not anything that I was ever taught to do in Judaism. There are a lot of holidays that we celebrated in Judaism that I liked. There's Passover was my favorite. But to actually read the Bible in English, where I didn't have to struggle to translate it, because Hebrew school It was translate. You didn't really pay attention to what it actually said. I don't know how your Hebrew school was.
100%.
But it was concentrating on translating it to just read my Bible and pray. To me, that is something that I developed as a tradition, I guess you could say. But that's very important to me as a Christian that I didn't have when I was practicing Judaism.
Well, I like to say Jewish people invented quiet time. We did, even though you didn't practice it. I had a late tefillin every morning.
As a guy.
That's right.
Girls
and that's the
didn't do
difference.
that.
That's right. Women didn't do that unless you're now in conservative or reform, where they're doing it anyway, because after all, God didn't mean it that way. At least that's what you hear. So I was laying tefillin. That's what it's called. You wrap a leather strap around your arm. It has Deuteronomy 6:4 and Deuteronomy 11. There's a little box that points to your heart, and there's a little box that sits on your head, and you say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and I'll love him with all my heart, soul, and mind." And so you're really telling God, although I can't say I was doing that, but you're telling God, you own me. I'm to love you with every part of my being. Labab is your heart, your will. Your nefesh is your soul. Your moed is your strength or mind. And so you tell God that. Interestingly enough, one of my projects in Bible college was to contact professors in the school. So this is now I'm a Christian. And I had to do a project on quiet time. It's very interesting you bring that up. And so I'm interviewing pastors, I'm interviewing missionaries, and I'm interviewing professors at that time, Philadelphia College of Bible. And my question was, can you tell me about your quiet time? Do you do it? Is it hard? Do you struggle? And any comments about it? Overwhelming. And I'm confessing, I never have the same time for my quiet time. But for them, they all said, I struggle with that. I do it in the morning. I do it in the afternoon. I do it at night. I pray in the car. So here were these giants of the faith to me, and they are. But that was, and yet when I hear you, Lorna, discuss it, it's the way God intended it to be. It's a conviction, number one. There's certainly Psalms that talk about meeting God in the morning, but it's a love story. You want to do it. It's something that you're compelled to do. And those men of God were compelled to do it. It's just, usually it's men. It's like a man trying to talk to his wife every day. The man comes home, this is conventional, so let's say you're dealing with your kids all day, the man comes home, and you say, how was your day? And you're ready to listen, and he's already talked out. He's done, and he's got to try to talk to you. You haven't talked to an adult, and so he says, everything's fine. And you say, that's what you're giving me? Fine? God's the same way. We got to start off with him and talk to him. Because if you wait too long, you just don't want any part of it. Horrible. The blank page, the pressure of this is due at a certain time. I got to turn this in. I sit there, which is hard enough to sit any length of time. So I sit. I got nothing. Well, maybe I'll have something later. So you walk away and you do something else. But you always have this thing. It's hanging over you. It's due. And so you say, I know it's due, but I got nothing. So for me, torture.
There's a difference between Steve's writing and mine in that I wrote mine all at once as a book. Steve had to write over a period of years, and he was on a deadline. I wasn't on a deadline. And he had to write it as articles, and he had deadlines. But with me, I would get a blank. I would write for a while, and everything would come, and then I would be stuck. So I would stop and I'd put it away. And I remember one time when my youngest daughter was young enough to play in the McDonald's play area that they used to have. She was probably 3, maybe. And I brought her to McDonald's because my husband was doing something and I dropped him off and I was going to pick him up. And I thought, well, I'll kill time by taking her to McDonald's for lunch and then she can play. And, well, all of a sudden, the Lord started giving me something for the book. And I grabbed a stack of napkins and she's playing, climbing up on all the little ladders they had. And I'm writing on napkins, writing. And I had a stack this big of napkins because the Lord was just giving me something. And then I went home and I keyed it all in. And then after a while, nothing. So you stop and you got nothing.
We have a Yiddish word, bupkis. You got nothing.
You got nothing. And then it starts again, and you just have to start writing, and you just write and write and write. I don't know whether a guy like Jerry Jenkins, who writes for a living, and that's all he does, his philosophy is you have to write every single day. It's your job. You discipline yourself. But I was a mother with 2 kids at home, and I had other things I was doing, and I was trying to get the book out, but I had no deadline. Nobody knew I was writing it really, but my husband and maybe some family members. And so I just, when the Lord gave it to me, I put it down, and when I got stuck, I didn't. And then he would urge me to start writing again. But Steve had to write it. He was on a deadline. It had to be done.
And they still do. When I write for Israel My Glory, it's like this voice that hangs over my head. You got to do this. It's high anxiety. It really is.
Writing is work.
Very hard.
It's hard work. It's not easy. And you have to go over it and over it and over it.
And then you turn it into your wife to be a sample thing, and she said, "What's your point?" "What's my point? I just spent 8 hours. And what's my point?" That means I take the paper with my head down, go back, and have to start all over again. I'm not making this up. It's true. Happy days are here again. I don't know if you felt that way, but that's the way I felt.
I have to tell you, when I wrote it, I didn't know what was going to happen with it because Friends of Israel did not ask me to write it. I had to just get this out because I felt the Lord was doing it. And I had a manuscript in a binder, and I brought it to whoever was in charge. Elwood McQuaid was executive director at the time, but he wasn't the person who was going to get the manuscript. So I gave it to whoever was going to get the manuscript, and she didn't like it. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. So that was it. I figured, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just not going to probably have it published. And because I felt it was a Friends of Israel book, I even had a chapter in there towards the end that talks about the Friends of Israel. So then it sort of laid there for a while. And I don't remember the exact details, but somebody else gave it to Elwood McQuaid to read. I remember I was working part-time for him at that point, and he mentioned something, and I said, well, I deal with that in my book. And then he mentioned something else, and I said, well, I talk about that in my book. But he had never seen the manuscript because it wasn't given to him. So his administrative assistant at the time, I think put a copy of it in his briefcase, and he was flying out to Seattle. And I was in bed asleep. I don't even know if Elwood knows this. I was in bed asleep, and the phone rings. It's like midnight. And I thought, oh no, somebody's dead, something happened. It was Elwood. He was on a different time zone. He had read it in the plane when he was flying to Seattle, and he was in his hotel room, and it was earlier to him. He didn't realize, I don't think, how late it was. And he said, I just finished reading your book. And he said, I love it, but you have to change the ending. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you need something like boy meets girl, boy boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. I said, I know exactly what you're talking about. And honestly, to this day, I don't know how I knew what he was talking about. The Lord must have just told me. And I rewrote the ending and gave it to him, and that was it. So it was kind of a funny story how it ended up being published.
For me, I dedicated the book to my parents. I was hoping that they would read it. And so I gave them, I showed them and told them. And when I went to visit them, I saw the book. And so I said, so, I see the book there. Did you read it? Said, we read the dedication. And we fell over the dedication. There you go.